For 1,000 years after the so-called fall of Rome, an empire endured. An empire that still called itself Roman. A civilization that preserved Roman laws, its culture, its military prowess, and above all, its unbreakable spirit. This was the Byzantine Empire, a guardian of the past and the architect of the future. With its heart in Constantinople, this empire stood as a beacon of civilization while Europe languished in the Dark Ages. It defied barbarian invasions, repelled foreign threats, and reshaped the world with its brilliance. From warfare to religion, from art to law, Byzantium did more than survive, it thrived. It carried the Roman torch forward for a millennium. This is the story of how the Byzantine Empire kept Rome alive. This is the tale of resilience, ambition, and an empire that refused to die. In the year 330 AD, Emperor Constantine the Great did something revolutionary. He moved the imperial capital eastward to Byzantium, renaming it Nova Roma, though history would remember it as Constantinople. This wasn't just a new capital, it was a fresh start, a city strategically located between Europe and Asia, at the crossroads of trade and military power. Constantinople had three major advantages over Rome. 1. Defensive strength. It was nearly impenetrable and surrounded by water on three sides. Later, it was protected by the Theodosian walls. 2. Economic dominance. Sitting on the Bosporus Strait, it controlled trade between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. 3. Cultural adaptability. Unlike Rome, which struggled with internal divisions, Constantinople embraced its role as the empire's new heart, fusing Roman traditions with Greek and Christian influences. The city walls, designed by Emperor Theodosius II, were an engineering marvel. Multiple layers of defenses, towers, and moats made it one of the most fortified cities in history. Beyond its walls, Constantinople was a thriving metropolis. It became the wealthiest city of the medieval world, controlling key trade routes that linked Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Golden Age of Byzantium. No discussion of Byzantium's Golden Age can begin without Emperor Justinian I, whose reign from 527 to 565 AD reshaped the empire. Known as the Emperor who never sleeps, Justinian sought to restore the glory of Rome while reinforcing Byzantine supremacy. One of Justinian's crowning achievements was the construction of the Hagia Sophia, a marvel of engineering that stood as the world's largest cathedral for nearly 1,000 years. With its massive dome, shimmering mosaics, and divine acoustics, it symbolized both imperial might and Christian devotion. Under the leadership of General Belisarius, Justiniani waged ambitious military campaigns reclaiming lost Western Roman territories from the Vandals, Ostrogoths, and Visigoths. Though these conquests were short-lived, they marked a fleeting moment where Rome's former glory seemed within reach. But perhaps Justinian's greatest legacy was his legal reform. The Corpus Juris Civilis, or Justinian's Code, standardized Roman law and laid the foundation for legal systems still in use today. Beyond military and legal accomplishments, Byzantium flourished economically. The empire's position at the crossroads of Europe and Asia made it a hub for global trade. Spices from India, silks from China, and furs from the Slavic lands all passed through Constantinople, enriching its coffers. In one of history's most daring acts of industrial espionage, Justinian secretly smuggled silkworm eggs from China. This move allowed Byzantium to develop its own silk industry, breaking the Chinese monopoly and securing immense wealth. The Byzantine solidus was one of the most stable currencies in the medieval world, ensuring economic prosperity even as Western Europe plunged into feudal fragmentation. Byzantium was not only an empire of swords and gold, but of ideas and faith. It was during the Golden Age that Orthodox Christianity crystallized into a distinct identity. Theological debates, such as those on iconoclasm, defined the spiritual landscape of Byzantium. Byzantine art, especially its mosaics, portrayed divine majesty with unmatched brilliance. Unlike the realism of Roman art, Byzantine depictions of Christ, saints, and emperors were stylized to convey spiritual transcendence. The empire also left its mark on music. Byzantine chant, with its haunting melodies and deep spiritual resonance, influenced Christian liturgical traditions for centuries. Byzantium's military might ensured its survival for over a millennium. The empire's elite troops, the cataphracts, were heavily armored cavalry that struck fear into enemies, their imposing presence on the battlefield unmatched by any contemporary force. These warriors, clad in layers of scale and lamellar armor, were trained in both melee combat and mounted archery, making them highly adaptable to various battle conditions. Byzantine generals like Nicephorus Phocas and John Zimisces introduced innovative tactics that solidified Byzantine dominance. Phocas, known for his brutal yet effective campaigns, restructured the army by emphasizing mobility and strategic fortifications, enabling Byzantium to reclaim lost territories in the east. Meanwhile, Byzantine warfare was revolutionized by Greek fire, a terrifying incendiary weapon that burned even on water. The combination of elite cavalry, strategic military reforms, and advanced weaponry cemented Byzantium's reputation as a formidable force in medieval warfare. If you found this journey through history fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more epic stories from the past. From the grandeur of the Byzantine Empire to the rise and fall of civilizations, we bring history to life. The struggles and survival. In the 7th and 8th centuries, a new formidable threat emerged: the Arab caliphates. Following the rapid expansion of Islam, the Arabs sought to conquer Constantinople, the crown jewel of the Mediterranean. The first major siege came in 674 AD, as the Umayyad Caliphate launched an ambitious assault. But the Byzantines had a secret weapon: Greek fire. A mysterious incendiary liquid that could burn on water. It turned the Arab fleet into a sea of flames. After years of struggle, the invaders retreated. The Second Great Siege came in 717 AD, when a massive Arab force led by Caliphate Suleiman once again led the siege to Constantinople. This time, the Byzantines were led by Emperor Leo III, a brilliant strategist. Using the power of Greek fire, strategic counterattacks, and the brutal winter that starved the Arab forces, the Byzantines secured yet another miraculous victory. These victories preserved the empire for centuries, but new threats were always on the horizon. In 811 AD, Emperor Nicephorus I led a campaign against the Bulgars, determined to crush their rising power. However, his ambitions ended in catastrophe at the Battle of Pliska. The Bulgars, led by the ruthless Khan Krum, ambushed the Byzantine forces in a narrow mountain pass, slaughtering the army and killing the emperor himself. In a chilling display of dominance, Krum had Nicephorus' skull hollowed out and turned into a drinking cup, a grim reminder of Byzantium's vulnerability. The empire, once seen as invincible, now faced the harsh reality of its mortal limitations. But the empire struck back. Under Emperor Basil II, the Byzantines waged a brutal war against the Bulgars. After decades of conflict, he delivered the final blow at the Battle of Clydion in 1014. 15,000 Bulgarian prisoners were captured and blinded, an act so horrifying that the Bulgar king died from shock. Byzantium had reclaimed its power, but the cost of endless warfare was beginning to show. Byzantium wasn't just divided by external enemies, it was torn apart from within. In the 8th and 9th centuries, the theological crisis known as iconoclasm rocked the empire. Emperor Leo III and his successors banned religious icons, claiming they were idolatrous. This decree divided society, pitting iconoclasts who sought a more austere form of worship against iconodules who saw icons as essential to their faith. Monasteries became battlegrounds, as many monks and clergy resisted imperial orders, leading to violent crackdowns, imprisonment, and executions. The conflict raged for more than a century, causing deep political and religious fractures. Finally, under Empress Irene and later the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, the veneration of icons was restored, only for another wave of iconoclasm to resurface in the early 9th century. The final resolution came in 843, with the triumph over orthodoxy. But by then, the empire had weakened itself through internal strife, leaving it vulnerable to external enemies waiting to take advantage. Then came one of the greatest disasters in Byzantine history. In 1071, Emperor Romanos IV led a massive army against the rising Seljuk Turks. At the Battle of Manzikert, the Byzantines suffered a catastrophic defeat. Romanos was captured and the Turks overran much of Anatolia, the empire's heartland. This loss crippled Byzantium's ability to defend itself and led to a desperate call for help from the West. That call would lead to the Crusades. Even as new enemies appeared, the Seljuk Turks and the Mongols, Constantinople remained unbroken, but betrayal would prove more dangerous than any enemy. The Fourth Crusade, a Christian betrayal. The Crusades were meant to unite Christendom against a common enemy, to reclaim Jerusalem and defend the faith. By the late 12th century, the Holy Land was still under Muslim control. The Third Crusade, led by legends like Richard the Lionheart, had failed to reclaim Jerusalem. In 1198, Pope Innocent III called for a new crusade, one that would finally succeed where others had failed. The plan was simple: gather an army, sail to Egypt, and strike at the heart of Muslim power before moving on to Jerusalem. However, wars needed funding, and this crusade was already in trouble before it even began. To transport an army across the Mediterranean, the Crusaders needed ships. The Venetian Republic, the dominant naval power at the time, agreed to build a fleet at a cost. The Crusaders promised to pay 85,000 silver marks, but by 1202, they had only raised a fraction of that amount. Venice demanded payment, but when the Crusaders couldn't pay, the Venetians proposed an alternative: attack the Christian city of Zara, a rebellious Venetian territory, in exchange for their debt. Desperate and without options, the Crusaders agreed. In November 1202, the Crusaders attacked and sacked the Christian city of Zara. Pope Innocent III was furious, excommunicating the entire crusade. But what happened next would be far worse. As the Crusaders licked their wounds from Zara, a new opportunity arose. Prince Alexius Angelus, the son of the recently deposed Byzantine Emperor Isaac II, arrived with a tempting offer. If the Crusaders helped him reclaim the throne of Constantinople, he promised vast rewards: money, supplies, and soldiers for their campaign to Jerusalem. It was a risky move. Constantinople, the jewel of Eastern Christendom, was no enemy, but greed and desperation won. In June 1203, the Crusaders arrived at the gates of Constantinople. The city's defenders were unprepared for what was coming. With Venetian ships launching ambitious attacks and Crusaders storming the land walls, the Byzantines struggled to hold their ground. The city was soon in chaos, and Emperor Alexius III fled in the dead of night. With no other choice, the Byzantine restored Isaac II and his son, Alexius IV, to the throne. The Crusaders expected payment, but Constantinople's treasury was nearly empty. Tensions rose as Alexius IV struggled to fulfill his promises. Soon, the uneasy alliance collapsed. In early 1204, the situation spiraled out of control. A palace coup led by Alexius Ducas overthrew and executed Alexius IV. The Crusaders, now without their promised reward, saw only one solution: take the city by force. On April 12, 1204, the Crusaders launched their final attack. The walls of Constantinople were breached, and what followed was 3 days of horror. the greatest Christian city in the world was ruthlessly pillaged. No one was spared. Crusaders looted the Hagia Sophia, desecrating its altars. Ancient relics, including pieces of the True Cross, were stolen and taken to Western Europe. Despite his earlier outrage, the Pope could do nothing to stop the horror. After the sack, the Crusaders established the Latin Empire of Constantinople, but it was weak and short-lived. Byzantines in exile would eventually reclaim their city in 1261, but the empire never recovered. What was meant to be a holy war against Islam became a Christian betrayal. The sacking of Constantinople deepened the rift between Catholic and Orthodox churches, a divide that lasts to this day. The final days of Byzantium. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire stood as the last bastion of Rome in the East. It had faced invasions, betrayals, and crusades. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self. The once great empire had been reduced to little more than the city of Constantinople, parts of Peloponnese, and a few scattered territories. At its head stood Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, a resolute but desperate leader who knew he was fighting against time. Born into the ruling Palaiologos dynasty, Constantine was no stranger to hardship. He had ruled as the despot of Morea, where he had shown his military acumen, but nothing could prepare him for the final battle that awaited him in Constantinople. Opposing Constantine was the ambitious and ruthless Sultan Mehmed II, a 21-year-old ruler determined to fulfill his destiny, the conquest of Constantinople. With an army numbering over 80,000, vastly outmatching the 7,000 defenders within the city, Mehmed prepared for war. On April 2nd, 1453, the Ottoman forces arrived before the walls of Constantinople. Their arrival marked the beginning of a siege that would last for nearly 2 months. Mehmed had a secret weapon, a giant cannon built by the Hungarian engineer Aubert. This monstrous bombard, called the Basilica, was capable of firing 600-pound stone projectiles over a mile. Day after day, the cannon battered the city's walls, shaking the very foundations of Constantinople's defences. Constantine XI and his men knew they were vastly outnumbered, but surrender was never an option. The emperor sent pleas for help to the Western powers, hoping for reinforcements from Christian Europe. But while the Pope and some Italian states sent a few ships and volunteers, the full-scale aid that the Byzantines desperately needed never arrived in time. In the early hours of May 29th, Mehmed launched his ultimate assault. As the Ottomans pressed their attack, a critical moment unfolded. A small postern gate, the Kirka Porta, was left open, either by accident or in the chaos of battle. Ottoman troops poured through the gap, overwhelming the defenders. Constantine XI, refusing to flee, tore off his imperial insignia and fought to the death alongside his men. His body was never definitively found, but his legacy as the last emperor of Byzantium was sealed. The once great city of Constantinople had fallen, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. Mehmed II, now known as Mehmed the Conqueror, entered the city in triumph. He rode to the Hagia Sophia, where he ordered it to be converted into a mosque, symbolizing the transformation of the city into the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople would become Istanbul, the jewel of the Ottoman world. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe. It marked the definitive end of the Middle Ages and the rise of the Ottoman Empire as a dominant force in the world. Though the empire fell, its influence endured through the centuries. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire stood as a bridge between the ancient and the medieval worlds.